عدت للبعد يا روح روحي فأسمى معاني الهوى في المدينة. على النبض قالوا وصلنا المدينة، فهاجت مشاعر قلبي الدفينة. حبيبي محمد من عشت أرجو لقاه هنا، منه نور المدينة. هنا كان يأكل حبي ويشرب، هنا كان قلب ملاقيه يطرب. فيا ليتني عشت عمري يا أقرب، وكنت له خادما في المدينة. هنا قام ليلا وصام وصلى، هنا العز والجود كل تجلى. وما رد ضيف بداره حلا، فجئنا وكل الرجا في المدينة. بروضته يا هناء المصلي، صفاء الكئيب وزاد المقل. دخلت وصليت فيها لعلي أنال النجاة بأرض المدينة. أقمنا الصلاة لعل الجباه تلامس موضع أقدام طه. مباركة كل أرض أتاها، فيا سعد روحي بترب المدينة. هنا والذي خلق العالمين، شفاء السقامير والعاشقين. جوار النبي سبى الروح فينا، وذاب الهوى في هواء المدينة. سلامي عليه سلام لروحي، جلاء الهموم شفاء الجروح. فإن عدت للبعد يا روح روحي فأسمى معاني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين، وعلى جميع إخوانه من النبيين والمرسلين، وآل كل وصحب كل ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and protect his nation from that which he fears for them. We ask Allah Ta'ala to increase our knowledge and benefit us with the knowledge we have acquired. Ameen. We'll start by having the sincere intention in the heart to attend this lesson for the obedience of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. We have started a series of lessons about fasting to make sure when one fasts, his fast is valid. Because not only we have to perform the obligations, but also we have to learn how to perform these obligations in order to make sure that we are fulfilling this obligation as Allah ordered. We mentioned in our previous lesson about how the beginning of Ramadan is determined. And we stated the quotes from the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence, Shafi'i, Hanafi, Maliki, and Hanbali, that Ramadan is confirmed by seeing the crescent or the completion of Shaban 30 days, and that there is no concern given to the astronomers in their calculations to determine the beginning and the end of the month. And that was stated by scholarly consensus and by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ before it. Because the Prophet ﷺ is the one who told us that we do not rely on calculations to determine the beginning and the end of the month. The month is either 29 or 30 days, and that depends on seeing the crescent. So after the sunset of the 29th day of Shaban, if the crescent is seen, we know that the following day is the first day of Ramadan. Otherwise, if it's not seen, we continue Shaban 30 days, and the day after will be the first day of Ramadan. In our lesson tonight, we'll start talking about who must fast. Because this is an obligation, but it's not an obligation upon every single person. Some are not obligated to fast. So we'll talk about who is obligated to fast. The one who is obligated to fast first is Muslim. So he must be a Muslim that is addressed with this obligation. That means the non-Muslims are not addressed with this obligation in this life. This does not mean that on the day of judgment they won't be tortured for not fasting and not praying, because had they embraced Islam, they would have been able to pray and fast. But since they did not embrace Islam, so they didn't pray and they didn't fast. On the day of judgment, those non-believers who will be in hellfire forever will be tortured for not embracing Islam, as well as not praying and not fasting. As Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran about the angels, when they ask the people of hellfire, what made you get here in hellfire? They say, we weren't among those who used to pray. That means they will be tortured on that day for not praying. But in this life, we don't address them with the obligation of fasting. In the past, non-Muslims were living in some Muslim regions. When it is the month of Ramadan, the ruler will ask Muslims to fast, but he won't address the non-believers with fasting. In addition, the act of worship is not valid from non-believers. If one does not embrace Islam, his prayer is invalid, his fast is invalid. So even if he were to imitate the Muslims, how they do, how they act, that wouldn't be valid, because the first condition for the acceptance and the validity of the good deeds, the acts of worship, is for one to be Muslim. So that's why the first one who is addressed with this obligation is a Muslim. Second, to be accountable. When we say to be accountable, that means he is sane and pubescent. He is sane because the one who is insane is not accountable, so he is not addressed with this obligation. Pubescent, here we are excluding the child, whether male or female, who has not reached puberty yet. He is not obligated to fast as a child, but it's the role of the guardian. The obligation is on the guardian, the father, the mother, the grandfather, the grandmother. It's a communal obligation amongst them to take that role and order that child who has attained the age of 7 lunar years to start fasting if he can bear fasting. These days, some people innovated something that does not relate to our religion in any way, which is to tell a child fast half a day. There is no such a thing as fast half a day. Rather, we tell the child to fast the full day from dawn till sunset when he attains that age, 7 lunar years. But we monitor the child. If we realize that he is unable to continue, he cannot bear fasting, then we tell him to break his fast. Otherwise, leave him. He will get used to it and he won't be harmed, insha'Allah azza wa jal. So the one who is obligated to fast is a Muslim, pubescent, and sane, and able to fast. That's the fourth condition. In order for that act of worship to be an obligation upon him, to be able to fast. There is a difference before we move on and talk about the ability between the non-believer by origin and the apostate, the murtad. Both are non-believers. Both are blasphemers. So there is a blasphemer by origin, meaning he is born from non-Muslim parents. Let us say he is born from Buddhist family. So we say this person is a non-believer or a blasphemer by origin because he follows his parents. This one, the people of the book who lived in Islamic states are not addressed with the obligation of fasting, as we mentioned. Now, when we say they are not addressed with the obligation of fasting, we do not request of them to fast before embracing Islam. If someone amongst those embraces Islam after 20, 30, 40 years, we do not ask of him to make up any of the prayers or any of the fasting before, because he will start a new page. That's as an encouragement for him to embrace Islam. So once someone converts to Islam, he was from a non-Muslim family, a blasphemer by origin, then he embraces Islam, all his past sins will be wiped out. Not only that, he will not be obligated to make up any of the prayers of fasting. Let us say he embraces Islam at the age of 50, 60. We do not request of him to make up any of the prayers or the fasting that he missed before he embraced Islam. Now we will start fresh, as they say. After he embraced Islam, now he will start fasting and praying. So we do not ask him to make up any of the prayers that he didn't pray because he was a Muslim, or any of the fasting days because he didn't fast because he was non-Muslim as well. But the apostate is a different case. The apostate is the one who was Muslim, then he apostatized, meaning he committed blasphemy, such as by swearing at Allah, swearing at a prophet, swearing at an angel, or believing that Allah is a body, has a shape or volume, or believing that Allah resides in the skies or sits on the throne, or by committing a blasphemous action such as to throw the Mus'haf, the Quran, in the trash, or to tread on it purposely. Such a person exits Islam by doing any of these. After he re-embraces Islam, we ask him to make up the prayers that he missed during that period of time when he was an apostate. We ask him to make up the missed days that he did not fast during that period of time. So let us say someone was Muslim, born as Muslim, lived for 20 years as Muslim. Then for some reasons, he left Islam. He chose to be an atheist, wal-iyazu billah. Then he came back to Islam after 10 years. This apostate, for 10 years he missed out praying and fasting. He has to make him up. He has to make him up. So that's one of the differences between the blasphemer by origin and the apostate, who is a blasphemer, but he was Muslim, then he apostatized. But both of them, if they die in that state of blasphemy, will be in hellfire forever. Both of them. Because the non-believer will not exit hellfire at all. He will remain in it forever. But the differences, as we come across them, we'll mention some that are related to our topic. So we talked about Islam, puberty, pubescence. The fourth condition for the obligation of fasting is for one to be able to fast. Now the ability is categorized into two categories. The first is the physical ability. The second is the religious ability. When we talk about the physical ability, we are referring to the one who is able physically to fast. Then he is obligated to fast. But if someone is physically unable to fast because he's very old, due to his old age, he's unable to fast, he cannot tolerate fasting, then this person is not addressed with this obligation. Okay, he cannot fast now, he's not expected to fast later. So what does he do in that case? He will be asked to pay an expiation. Will come across it, inshallah. Same with the one who is ill with a kind of sickness that is most likely to stay with him. He is not hoping to be recovered from such an illness. It's a permanent illness. Like the one who is paralyzed. He is not hoping to be recovered from this sickness. So saying this person is not addressed with this obligation now, he cannot fast, and also he's not expected to make it up later. Such a person, we tell him to pay an expiation as well. As for the religious ability, we are referring to the lady that is not in her monthly period or the postpartum bleeding period. Because if she is in her menstruation period or the postpartum bleeding period, she is unable to fast religiously. Now physically she can fast, but religiously she is not allowed. Even if she were to intend to fast, the fast is invalid from her. So in order for her fast to be valid, she has to be clean from the menstruation or the postpartum bleeding period. So that's the religious ability. But they have to make up these days. Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, used to say, we were ordered to make up the missed days of fasting, but not the missed prayers. What's the wisdom behind this? The wisdom behind this is that Ramadan comes once a year. So if she were to be addressed with making up 7 days of fasting, whatever she misses, that's not a lot. It's not a burden or a hardship on her. But if she were to be addressed with making up the missed prayers every month, so she has 7 days of qada every month, that will be a hardship on her. So that's why ladies during the menstruation period will not pray or fast. After they become clean, they don't make up the missed prayers, but they make up the missed days of Ramadan. When a lady is in Ramadan and she has her period, she is not obligated to abstain from eating and drinking. So she's allowed to eat and drink during the day because she has an excuse. Same with the one who is unable to fast due to old age or a sickness he's not hoping to be recovered from. So he will be eating and drinking during the month of Ramadan, and he is not sinful in that case. Same with the one who is temporarily sick during the month of Ramadan. So it happened that during the month of Ramadan he got sick for 3 days. He was unable to fast during these days, so he didn't fast for an excuse. So for the rest of the day he is allowed to eat and drink. But the one who doesn't fast for no valid reason, he chose not to fast because he wants to eat, he wants to drink, but he doesn't have an excuse, such a person is not allowed to eat and drink during the day because he didn't fast for no reason Islamically. When I say this, that means every time he is eating or drinking during the day, he's committing sins. And since we are not allowed to help someone commit a sin, if we know of someone who is not fasting and he has no excuse, and he approaches us during the day and he asks for drink or food and the like, we are not allowed to provide him with food or drink. But if you know someone is not fasting for a valid excuse, he's sick, he's unable to fast, then you can give him water, you can give him food because he has an excuse in that case. And that's for the dignity and respect for this month, during the month of Ramadan. That's why if someone has a restaurant, during the day he cannot offer dine-in for people who are not fasting for no excuse. He can sell food for people to eat after sunset, but during the day he is not allowed to give them food to eat or open for dine-in. He is not allowed to do so. That's out of respect for this month. He is not allowed to do that. The one who did not fast for a valid reason, such as the lady that is menstruating or in her postpartum bleeding period, or the one who did not fast for a sickness, or he didn't fast for no reason, they must make up the missed prayers, missed fasting. They must make him up these days. As Allah said in the Quran, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. The one who is sick or a traveler, and because of that he didn't fast, he has to make him up. That's what is mentioned in the Quran. But the one who doesn't fast for being very old, so he's unable to fast, or due a permanent sickness, so it's not expected from him to fast even in the future, what do we ask of this person? We ask of him to pay the expiation. Now the expiation, according to Imam El-Shafie radiallahu anhu, is the average size hands cupped together, filled with the most common staple food of that region, such as wheat. Wheat is sufficient in all the parts of the world. Wheat or something else that is classified the most common staple food of that region. For instance, in Indonesia and Malaysia, the most common staple food is rice. So one may give rice instead, because that's the most common staple food in that region. What's the amount per day? The average sized hands cupped together, filled with the most common staple food of that region. With wheat, for instance, after they measured the average sized hands cupped together, 4 of them, that makes 1 sa'. They call it 1 sa', what about 1,650 grams. So a quarter of them will be 400 and a bit grams. So less than half a kilogram. So if someone is unable to fast, let us say he is in Indonesia, he's unable to fast due to being very old or due to a permanent sickness, what does he do? Every day that he is not fasting, he would pay an expiation, which is approximately half a kilogram of rice, would give it to a poor person. According to Imam El-Shafie radiallahu anhu, that expiation would be paid either during the day that he's not fasting or on the night before. The night before that day that he is not fasting. So either he pays the expiation at night or during the day that he is not fasting. So he cannot pay it ahead for the whole month. And if he were to defer it, he may defer it for a valid reason. Let us say he's expecting a poor relative to arrive and he's more deserving of that, so he is delaying for an excuse. But if he doesn't have an excuse, he wouldn't be allowed to delay paying the expiation till the end of the month. Now listen carefully. According to Imam El-Shafii radiyallahu anhu, Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu, and Imam Ahmad radiyallahu anhu, according to these 3 scholars, you are not allowed to pay the value in money for zakah or for expiation. The only scholar out of the 4 who allowed one to pay zakah by value, the value of it by money, or the expiation, for instance, is Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. He is the one who allowed to pay the value of it, what is equivalent to that. But you need to keep in mind that if you were to pay the value in money, then you pay the value in money. What value? The value of the expiation according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Not according to other scholars, according to Imam Abu Hanifa. And according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, the expiation in wheat is half a sa'. which is 2 muds, not 1. So one would be paying the value of that and not the value of 1. So if you want to pay 1 mud per day, that's according to Imam Al-Shafie radiallahu anhu, and you pay it in crops like wheat and rice, if that's the most common staple food of that region. So keep that in mind. If you want to pay zakah and you want to pay money, you're not paying wheat, barley, raisins. You want to pay money. So that's according to what Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Then you have to pay the value of the zakah according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. We'll talk about it in detail later inshallah, but keep that in mind. Also, this expiation cannot be paid ahead of the month of Ramadan, as some people may do. Before even the arrival of the month of Ramadan, they send the money to Lebanon, to a poor person, and they give him the money. And they say, we paid the expiation for the months coming. They are not allowed to. However, according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, one is allowed to pay it on the first day of Ramadan for the whole month. That's according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. You can pay on the first day of Ramadan the expiation of the whole month. You can do that. So if, for instance, the value will be approximately $10 per day, 10 times 30, that's 300. He is allowed, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, to pay the 300 at the beginning of the month. Then the scholars mention the case of the traveler. The traveler can choose to fast and can choose not to fast. But in both cases, if he chooses not to fast, this does not mean he doesn't have to make him up. He has to make him up. So if he can fast, that would be better for him. And that would be valid from him, and he doesn't have to make him up. He's a traveler. Allah Ta'ala said, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Meaning, if you choose to fast while being a traveler, and you can bear the fasting, it's better for you. Especially these days, if one were to travel a traveling distance, such as from here to Canberra, it's about 280 km, for instance, from here to Canberra, and that's a traveling distance. It takes him nearly 3 hours. But in a comfortable car with air condition and the like, 3 hours he won't find a difficulty. But still, that's an option for him if he doesn't want to fast for that day. But according to Imam Al-Shafie radiallahu anhu, the travel must be established before dawn. That means before dawn he must have left the boundaries of the hometown. So let us say, for instance, 6:30 or 5 o'clock, for instance, is the dawn time. Before 5 o'clock, he must be outside the boundaries of his hometown in order to be allowed to break the fast for that day. If he left at 7 o'clock or 6:30, that means this is after dawn. For that day, he is not allowed to break his fast. And that's an important case. Sometimes, some flights may be too early. But some flights are at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is after dawn, and they go from Sydney to Dubai, 14 hours. 14 hours. And because they are traveling from Sydney to Dubai, so they are following the sun, the day will be even longer. The day will be longer. So if the plane takes off at 6 o'clock, that means after dawn, they are not allowed to break the fast for that day. They need to continue fasting. Unless they find a difficulty during that travel and they find themselves in need of breaking the fast, then they will break it for an excuse. That's according to many scholars. But Imam Ahmad radiyallahu anhu had a facility in this matter. He said, if one were to travel after dawn, he is allowed to break his fast after he started fasting, of course, if he is a traveler, provided that he left the boundaries of his hometown. So according to him, to Imam Ahmad, once the plane takes off, he will wait for nearly half an hour, let us say. Now he knows that after half an hour flying, now he has left the boundaries of his hometown in Sydney, let us say. Then he is allowed to break his fast. That's according to Imam Ahmad. But other scholars mention that in order for one to be allowed to break his fast, if he's a traveler, he must have initiated the travel before dawn time. Before dawn time. Second condition that allows one to break his fast, if he is a traveler, that this distance must be a traveling distance. The traveling distance is measured, as in the past, by what is equivalent to 2-day walking. 2-day walking will be about 100, according to one of the sayings, 135 kilometers. So if one is traveling that distance or more, he is allowed to break his fast, because that distance allows one to shorten the prayer. So Dhuhr will be prayed 2 instead of 4. Asr will be prayed 2 instead of 4, and Isha is prayed 2 instead of 4. There is no shortening for Fajr or Maghrib prayer. That distance, the traveling distance, a walking distance of 2 days, allows one to break his fast, with the condition that we mentioned first, that he left the boundaries of his hometown before dawn time. So these are 2 conditions now. Third condition is that his travel is not sinful. His travel is not sinful. So if someone establishes a travel to commit a sin, then he is not allowed to break his fast, because these facilities are not achieved with sins. That's a rule. The facilities are not achieved with sins. So if someone is traveling to another country to buy alcohol, let us say, he is not allowed to break his fast or to shorten the prayers, because his travel is sinful. So that was the purpose of his travel, is sinful. The purpose is sinful. But if the purpose is not sinful, but while on the way one committed a sin, he's still allowed to take with this facility. Like, for instance, someone is traveling to Lebanon. He established the travel before dawn, and his intention was to visit his mother, a relative, or any other permissible reason. So his travel is not sinful. So we say he is allowed to do what? To combine between the prayers, and he is allowed to choose not to fast during that travel. But let us say on the way he was lazy, he didn't pray. So he was fasting, he established the travel as fasting person, but on the way he didn't pray. So he committed a sin. So on the way he committed a sin, but the purpose of his travel was not sinful. So he is still allowed to take with the facility and break his fast in that case. Some people, unfortunately, when they are traveling, they miss out prayers. Even you'll be shocked when you know that even in the past they used to travel from Beirut to Medina and Mecca to perform Hajj or Umrah in buses. On the way, it takes, let us say, 36 hours, 40 hours to get there. They don't pray. So they are going to perform Hajj or Umrah, but they commit sins on the way. But the purpose of the travel is not sinful. So one is allowed on the way to combine between the prayers and shorten them. So he can stop, or when they stop at any station, he can make wudu and pray Zuhr and Asr combined and shortened, 2-2. Won't take much time from him. Maghrib and Isha, he can combine between them. He can pray Maghrib 3 and Isha 2. But he is not allowed to miss out the prayers while he is traveling. That's not an excuse. But for fasting, it's a facility if he were to choose not to fast while being a traveler. So I'll go back and list these conditions that allow one not to fast while being a traveler. The distance must be a traveling distance, 2-day walking, equivalent to 135 kilometers. Second, his travel must be established before dawn. Third, his travel is not sinful. With these conditions fulfilled, one is allowed to break his fast while being a traveler. Though we mentioned that if he can tolerate fasting, it's better for him to continue fasting, as Allah mentioned. Also, the one who is sick, who got sick during fasting, he is allowed to break his fast. But that sickness, the level of that sickness should be accompanied with what? Or associated with a hardship that he experiences if he were to continue fasting. But this hardship has a level. Not as some people may do, just because they have a bit of rise in the temperature, they want to break the fast. Or if they feel with stomach ache or headache, they want to break the fast. That's not an excuse for them. It must be that hardship to the extent that one experiencing a hardship that he cannot continue fasting with. Otherwise, if he were to choose to continue fasting with this hardship, it would lead to one's death, or prolonging the sickness for that person, or it may affect him in a way that he might be in a critical condition. Something like this. So it's not the easy hardship that can be tolerated. We're talking about a severe hardship, not an easy one. The scholars said it is compared to the hardship that would face one who wants to use water, he wants to make tayammum instead of using water and making wudu. You know, in some cases one is unable to use water to perform wudu. Let us say he's burned. If he were to use water to wash his organs, what's going to happen? Now, he's not going to die usually, but he might have infection. That sickness might be prolonged, will take more time to heal. So that is sufficient for him to go for the alternative. So instead of making wudu, he can make tayammum. The scholars weighed the hardship for one to continue fasting with that case of the one who would choose to make tayammum instead of performing wudu with that kind of hardship that he's facing. Some people talk about the lady, for instance, that is pregnant or she's breastfeeding. She may experience a hardship, but what hardship that would allow her to choose not to fast? It should be a hardship where she knows from herself she's unable to fast. Let us say she has an issue with the blood pressure and she's pregnant. She tried before to fast with that condition and she had a severe hardship during the day. She was fainting, unable to fast, and so on. So she had a previous experience from herself that whenever she is pregnant, she is unable to fast. Such a lady would not fast in that case, and she has to make up these days. Same with the breastfeeding lady. Or sometimes a trustworthy doctor may tell the lady, because she's pregnant for the first time, he might tell her, for instance, you are unable to fast because you have these problems, and if you were to fast, then you would experience a hardship or you may harm yourself. So anyway, if one knows of himself or was told by a trustworthy doctor that fasting is harmful for him, he is not allowed to fast because he's harming himself. When he gets harmed, he's not allowed to fast. What does he need to do? He has to make him up. But the trouble, as we mentioned, he might be harmed and he might not be harmed. If he knows that he is not harmed during his travel and he is able to fast that day, it's better for him to continue fasting. But if he is sick and that sickness is at a level where he knows himself, if he were to fast, he will be harmed, he's not allowed to fast. That's something very important, because sometimes you may find someone at a very old age, he might be told by a trustworthy doctor that fasting would harm him. He has blood pressure and other heart problems, whatever, and he needs to take the medicine regularly every 4 hours, but he sees people around him fasting and he's encouraged and he would say, I want to fast. Yeah, but if he harms himself, he is not allowed to. What does he do instead? We see if that sickness is temporary sickness, we tell him to make him up later on. If it's a permanent sickness, we ask him to pay the expiation. So the pregnant lady and the breastfeeding lady who doesn't fast because they know they might be harmed, they experience a hardship when they fast, so they might be harmed. So because of that, they choose not to fast. So here the fee is on herself. Here, if she breaks the fast, or she chooses not to fast in that case, she has to make them up and no expiation is due. But if her worries were about the child, if she's pregnant, she's worried about the child, she might have a miscarriage because she's not feeding well, or if she's breastfeeding, she might not have enough milk to provide to the baby. So she chooses not to fast out of her fear for what? For the child, for the baby, not for herself, for the baby. Then she has to make them up and she has to pay an expiation. And as we mentioned, according to Imam El-Shafie radiallahu anhu, that expiation is paid during Ramadan for every day. So day by day, the expiation, but she would make them up the missed days of fasting later. Now here you may ask a question, what about if she wants to pay the value in money? So we said that's according to what Imam, when we talk about the value, Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, according to him, there is no expiation upon the pregnant lady and the breastfeeding lady. So if she doesn't fast, she has to make them up. Whether her fear is for the baby or her fear is for herself. That's according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Also, according to Imam Al-Shafii radiallahu anhu, if someone doesn't fast during the month of Ramadan for no valid reason, then he is obligated to make up these days straight after the day of Eid. The day of Eid is the 1st of Shawwal, so he will start on the 2nd. Because Eid is one day. Although people would be celebrating usually for 3 days, but Eid is one day. So that day, the day of Eid, he cannot fast. But he will start from the 2nd day. He cannot delay. He is sinful in delaying. Why? Because he missed out some days of fasting for no valid reason. But if one missed out some days of fasting for a valid reason, according to Imam Al-Shafii radiallahu anhu, he has the whole year to make him up. The whole year. Such as the lady that did not fast due to menstruation. She missed out 6 days, 7 days. Because of that reason, that's a valid reason. But she has to make them up during the whole year. If she doesn't make them up during the whole year for no excuse, then Ramadan of the following year arrives, she has to make them up still. But now she has to pay an expiation for each day. So if she missed out, let us say, 10 days from previous Ramadan, and she did not make them up, and she had no reason not to make them up, and Ramadan of the coming year arrives, she still have to make up the 10 days. They won't be multiplied, the days. 10 days. She has to make them up. But she has to pay an expiation. 10 expiations in that case. If she does not make up these 10 days in the next year as well, she still has to pay to make up the 10 days, but now she has to pay 20 expiations. In the third year, 30, and so on. So the expiation is getting added every year, but the days are the same that she has to make up. Also, for one to fast, he needs to observe 2 integrals. Now, when you think about 2, that seems easy. But one has to be cautious. Otherwise, some people might be invalidating their fast while thinking at the same time that they are still fasting. So they won't get from their fast except that they were hungry and thirsty, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So if someone can fast during the day of Ramadan, however, he needs to take the medicine before dawn and after sunset, and he can manage to fast, then he is still obligated to fast. Some people may have a kind of asthma, but it's not that severe. But they use the puffer every day. But if they use it before dawn, they can last for the whole day, especially if the day is short, for instance. They need to start the day as fasting. Then during the day, while they are fasting, if they experience an attack, asthma attack, and they need to take the puffer, here we tell them, break your fast and take the puffer. So they break the fast for a valid reason. They are allowed afterwards to eat and drink for the rest of the day. They are not sinful. But they are not fasting. They have to make it up later. Maybe at a time when the day is shorter or when they are feeling better and so on. But we do not say to the one who is experiencing the asthma, use the puffer during the day and you are still fasting. It doesn't work like this, because some unfortunately said that. They said to the one who is suffering from asthma, you can use the puffer during the day and you are still fasting. When you use the puffer, what are you inhaling inside? Medicine. So the particles of the medicine will go inside, and that's why you are feeling better. So you are taking medicine. How would a person that is taking medicine remains fasting? So it's like saying to someone who is having headache, take Panadol, for instance, without drinking water, and you remain fasting. It doesn't work. If he were to take the medicine, he is in need of it, we tell him take it, and you break your fast and you make it up later. Some people with stomach ulcers, for instance, also they say they need to eat every few hours, let us say. Otherwise, they may experience a hardship. Here we look at the hardship, to what extent. Because not anyone with a stomach ulcer cannot fast. Some can tolerate it. So they can start the day fasting. Then during the day, when they experience a hardship that they cannot continue fasting except they are getting harmed, we tell them to break the fast in that case. Some people may be working in very hard labor work. Very hard. So they ask, are we allowed not to fast? No, we tell them you have to fast. Some of them may say, but my job is very hard. The labor that I'm doing is very hard. We say, even if that's the case, it's either you look for another job during this month, or you can start your day as fasting. If while you are working in such a condition you experience a very hardship, very strong hardship that you cannot continue fasting with, you are allowed to break your fast. But first you look for an alternative, because some may ask that that's the only job, the only opportunity they have, and if they were to quit that job, they won't be able to provide themselves, the wives and children, with the obligatory sustenance. So they rely on this job. They don't have any alternative. Here we tell them to start the day fasting. And while they are fasting during the day, if they experience a hardship, we tell them to break the fast. Finally, before we talk about the integrals, we'll leave it till next week, inshallah. But I'll talk in brief about the 15th night of Shaban and the 15th day of Shaban. We are in the month of Shaban, and the Prophet ﷺ used to fast a lot during this month. And when asked, what is the reason behind your excessive fasting during this month, that nearly the whole month, he would fast the whole month nearly, except for a few days. He told them this is a month that many people are unaware of its benefits, that lies between Rajab and Ramadan. And it's a month when the deeds are raised. And I would like for my deeds to be raised while I'm fasting. So this is what was mentioned. The 15th day of Shaban, because some people, when you want to fast the 15th day of Shaban, they tell you, why are you fasting this day? The hadith about spend the night preceding the 15th day of Shaban in acts of worship and fast the following day, they said this is a weak hadith. So even if it's a weak hadith, the mere reliance is not on it. The mere reliance is on another authentic hadith and sahih. When the Prophet ﷺ recommended what? Fasting the 3 white days, they call them, of every month. 13th, 14th and 15th. Of every month, they call them the white days. That's confirmed in the hadith, in a sahih hadith, to fast these days. And 15th of Shaban is one of them. And the rewardability of fasting the 15th day of Shaban lies under the general rule of fasting. So there is no problem. One will not be going against the religion if he were to fast the 15th day of Shaban. Rather, he will be following the rules of the religion. In addition, even if the hadith is weak, what did the scholars say about the weak hadith? You can rely on it in recommended rewardable deeds. And here the hadith recommends for one to fast the 15th day of Shaban, and he will get rewards for it. So one can act upon that weak hadith. Although it's weak, but he can act upon it, and that's a rule that the scholars of Islam stated, and it's well known. Also, it has to be noted that the 15th day of Shaban, or the 15th night of Shaban, it's not the night when the Quran was sent down, because the night when the Quran was sent down is the night of Al-Qadr in Ramadan, not the 15th night of Shaban. But there is something specific about this night that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in another hadith, which is that when it is the night of Shaban, Allah bestows a special mercy upon the slaves. By this special mercy, everyone will be forgiven except for the non-believers, and the Muslims who have enmity between one another for worldly matters. Those won't be forgiven on that night. The non-believer because he's a non-believer. But those Muslims who have enmity for worldly matters won't be forgiven on that night. But the rest of the Muslims will be forgiven on that night. When we say they are forgiven, that means with that special mercy, some Allah will forgive all of their sins, and others Allah would forgive some of their sins. But there is forgiveness for them to a certain extent, either some of their sins or all of their sins on that night. That's why do not hold grudges against your Muslim brothers and sisters, and make sure that this night will pass on you and you have no enmity between you and another Muslim for a worldly matter, so you can be, inshallah azza wa jal, covered by the special mercy on that night. Finally, on the night of the 15th of Shaban, some people would like to spend it in reciting Quran, praying, optional prayers, making dua, supplication, and that's good. Although it's not authenticated from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that a specific surah must be recited on that night, or a specific dua, supplication must be read on that night. You can use any dua, supplication that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to make, especially ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. That was a very common dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But some people, unfortunately, they made up what they called the dua of the 15th night of Shaban. If it was a compilation of some of the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we wouldn't have objected to it. But they put some sentences in it that are very dangerous. Because these sentences they put, they mean, if one were not to be cautious, they connote that one is asking Allah to change His will. And the will of Allah does not change. As Allah said in the Quran, مَا يُبَدَّلُ الْقَوْلُ لَدَيْ. My will does not change. So if I say, on this night or any other night, oh Allah, cure me, does that mean I will be cured definitely? No. I might be cured and I might remain sick. That depends on the will of Allah. If Allah willed for me to be cured, I'll be cured. If Allah willed for me to remain sick until I die, this is what's going to happen. Whatever Allah will shall happen. It will not change. So a person may say, so why would I make dua then? You make dua in all cases, this is an act of worship, you'll be rewarded. If you make dua, you are submitting yourself to Allah, humbling yourself to Allah Azza wa Jal, showing your need to Allah Azza wa Jal. So you have this feeling of veneration and glorification in your heart towards Allah. So you'll be rewarded for this. Whether you want to get what you are asking Allah Azza wa Jal for or not. If you get what you ask Allah for, then you gain two things. You gain the reward of supplication and you got what you ask Allah for. But if you didn't get what you ask Allah for, still you have gained what? The reward of making dua. So warn others against this fabricated dua that they call it dua of the 15th night of Shaban, where they say and they start sending messages on WhatsApp and the like on that night. They say today is the night of changing the will of Allah. A'udhu billah. Allah does not change, because change is the most obvious sign that such a thing is a creation. We change from one state to another because we are creations, but Allah does not change. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless us during the month of Shaban and enable us to reach the month of Ramadan and perform good deeds within it. Ameen. And Allah knows best. We say La ilaha illallah and make salah on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
على النبض قالوا وصلنا المدينة، فهاجت مشاعر قلبي الدفينة. حبيبي محمد من عشت أرجو لقاه هنا، منه نور المدينة. هنا كان يأكل حبي ويشرب، هنا كان قلب ملاقيه يطرب. فيا ليتني عشت عمري أقرب وكنت له خادما في المدينة. هنا قام ليلا وصام وصلى، هنا العز والجود كل تجلى. وما رد ضيف بداره حلا، فجئنا وكل الرجا في المدينة. بروضته يا هناء المصلي، صفاء الكئيب وزاد المقل. دخلت وصليت فيها لعلي أنال النجاة بأرض المدينة. أقمنا الصلاة لعل الجباه تلامس موضع أقدام طه. مباركة كل أرض أتاها، فيا سعد روحي بترب المدينة. هنا والذي خلق العالمين، شفاء السقامير والعاشقين. جوار النبي سبى الروح فينا، وذاب الهوى في هواء المدينة. سلامي عليه سلام لروحي، جلاء الهموم شفاء الجروح. فإن عدت للبعد